The folks up in the balcony, the screen's not on again, so sorry about that. As a sports fan, the summer of 1998 was a big one. Michael Jordan, my favorite player, just won his last NBA championship against the Jazz and then retired for a second time, even though he eventually came back again. The NBA then went into like a player lockout, and that lasted 204 days. And because of those things, I kind of just stopped watching basketball. But that summer, baseball caught my attention, as that summer was that famous home run race between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. Again, you baseball fans, you probably remember that summer. They both were competing to break Roger Maris's home run record of 61 home runs. And, it made for amazing TV, didn't it? It seemed like every game, one of them homered. And I remember watching the game when Mark McGwire hit his 60-second home run. They actually were playing the Cubs, and Sammy Sosa was there. And he ran down and gave Mark McGwire a big hug after it happened. It made for great TV. Millions of people will watch these games waiting to see that record fall and which one of those would be the home run champion. Baseball had record viewers that season. McGwire, he actually ended up with 70 home runs, and Sosa, 66 home runs. They both broke the record. But even though both players got what they wanted, breaking the home run record, even though baseball got what they wanted of, millions and millions of people watching, they were done in the wrong way. Wanting to break the home run record, that's a good thing, right? Wanting people to watch your show, your program, go to the games, that's a good thing. But they shouldn't be accomplished by doing the wrong thing. Both McGwire and Sosa, they were using performance-enhancing drugs. Even though it really wasn't illegal at that time, it still was wrong. Using those performance-enhancing things got them what they wanted, but doesn't mean it made it right. And because of that, neither of them, as well as even countless of other baseball players, don't go into their rightful place in baseball history. All because they sought something good in the wrong way. Well, today we are in 1 Samuel, chapter 24, all the way through 26. So feel free to turn there in your Bibles. You can pull it up on your smartphones. You can pull out your sermon notes in your bulletin that lists the page number of the pew Bibles right in front of you. You want to go that route. Also going to have the verses up on the screen as well. But as you turn there, today we're actually closing out our series called High and Low of 1 Samuel. And we're going to go through these pivotal chapters in this just amazing book. And there's a common theme that presents itself in these three chapters. In each chapter, David, he's presented with an opportunity to take something that he wants, maybe even he deserves, and he can take it easily. But in order to take it easily, he would have to commit a sinful act. But of course, what he wants is good, and the thing you could take is right, but you have to take it in the wrong way. And that's the situation that you see in these chapters. And the big idea for today is basically the title of the sermon is Don't Sin to Win. Don't sin to win. So again, if you're just joining us today, I want to give you just a little bit of the background so you understand the context of these chapters of this book. The context is this: is the king of Israel is King Saul, and he's not a godly man. And God has actually anointed David to take his place as king. But standing in front of David being the king is Saul. And Saul, he's just jealously clinging on to his power, and in his rage and his immaturity, he is hunting David. Saul thinks that if he can kill David, he can remove this threat to the kingship. So over and over again, David's being hunted and cornered, but God has delivered. And we had left out last week with God providing distraction with the Philistines. And that's where we pick up here in chapter 24, verses 1 through 2. It says, after Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. So again, David, he's hiding in the wilderness, and what happens over and over again. He is ratted out about where he's hiding. And so Saul, he goes with 3,000 soldiers to find him. And then we see this in verse 3. It says, Saul came to the sheep pens along the way, and a cave was there. And Saul went to relieve himself, and David and his men were far back in the cave. So Saul, he just happens to walk into the same cave where David is, and his men are hiding to, well, again, what does the text say? To relieve himself. Again, he took a bathroom break. In order to help you understand how vulnerable Saul was at this moment, again, I want to paint an awkward picture for us this morning. This phrase, relieve himself, it actually gets translated from this strange Hebrew phrase that means to cover one's feet. And sometimes it actually means sleeping. In fact, some Bible translations actually translate this verse as that Saul was asleep in the cave. But more likely, Saul was going to the bathroom. And again, to paint an awkward picture, not number one. In fact, David Sumar, who's an expert in the book of 1 Samuel and a Hebrew scholar, he actually said that Saul was evacuating his bowels. Again, I think you get the picture here of what he's doing. So we can understand that situation that Saul, he's a bit distracted in this moment, right? He's paying zero attention to what's happening in the back of the cave. And while it's kind of humorous to talk about this, if we shift our focus to David, this is really an interesting moment for him. Again, it's a pivotal moment for David. Because for the first time, David, he's presented not with a way out, with like an escape, but David actually has an opportunity to take what God has given him through promise. That God has promised that David will be the king, and now God delivers Saul into the cave, and Saul is completely oblivious and vulnerable. And it seems too good to be true, right? It seems too much of a coincidence that Saul just ends up in the cave where David is hiding, and David's men are actually like, this has to be God right here. David's men, they tell David that this has to be God's doing, and we see this in verse 4, what they say. It says, the men said, this is the day that the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. So right now, David here, he's at a scary crossroads. Because again, it seems like God has given him, teed up the scenario where he can take what's been promised to him, what he wants. And the only thing standing in between him and the kingship is Saul, and Saul is right there. He's vulnerable, and David can just take it. I mean, it's right there, and David's friends are like, yeah, David, this is from God. This is God's provision. How else would Saul end up in this cave like this? Again, it's an interesting crossroad for David. Will David take it? He can take what's rightfully his, but you know what? He would have to do it in a sinful way. Because again, David, he knows what Exodus chapter 22, verse 28 says, which says, do not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people. God forbade even the cursing of your ruler, let alone killing them. David knew that. And David knew that God would never give a situation where his promises will be fulfilled in sinful means, sinful ways. It's never God's way to accomplish his ordained plan. It's never, ever through sinful means. So what does David do? The rest of verse 4 says this. And David crept up unnoticed, very interesting, creeping up in that moment, and he cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Again, he doesn't kill him, but he just cuts off a corner of his robe. And David knew that at the corner of the robe, there's this tassel. And he's going to use this tassel a little bit later as evidence, that basically saying, hey, I could have killed you, Saul, but I didn't. And he's going to give that hard evidence to prove his innocence and try to call Saul off his chase. And it's with this tassel in mind that he, of course, lets Saul finish his business and go on his way. We might, at this moment, think that we should applaud David and celebrate his restraint right here. That he could have taken the kingship by force, and he doesn't. All he does is to send Saul a message providing his innocence. We should kind of applaud that, right? Not so fast. Listen to what David says here next in verses 5 through 6. He says, afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut a corner of his robe. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or I lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. And David actually feels guilty, not celebratory right here. He feels guilty because he knew that what he just did was not an innocent act. See, Israel, they had strict national dress code. I mean, super, super strict. The Torah, their Torah outlined exactly how outer garments were to look. And the corner of a robe were to be tassels, 4 corners, 4 tassels. And so David, he cut one of those off. Not only was David cutting off a tassel for hard evidence, he was actually cutting out a tassel to make Saul break the Jewish law. That now Saul, he was in violation of the national dress code, and David, he feels guilty for doing it. He knows that he hasn't just sent Saul a message, but he's actually humiliated him. He knows that he's doing that. He's cursing his ruler, isn't he? He knows that while he showed restraint, he still let a small sin substitute for a big sin. He knows that he didn't go all the way and snatch what he could have snatched, but he took a little bit. And David knows that a small sin is not a suitable replacement for a big sin. Again, I think we all need to hear that this morning, don't we? That a small sin is not a suitable replacement for a big one. And I think we can apply that here in the year of 2024. And you're probably not waiting for the kingship to be delivered to you, and you're probably not standing over the person who's in your way. Again, that's probably not your situation or your scenario. But you probably have a job. And you might feel dissatisfied in your job. In fact, you feel so frustrated because you've been passed over for a rightful promotion. In fact, you may even be wrongfully denied a promotion. Like you've been promised something and it hasn't been delivered, promised and it's been taken away, and you feel so slighted in the situation. And then David's scenario becomes your scenario because a situation will come up where you can recoup all the losses, all the wrongful denials that you had. It'll cost you just one little lie. A situation will come up that is so perfect that nobody will know, and you can take what you think you deserve, and nobody will know, but you will have to take it with that sinful step right there. And then David's scenario becomes your scenario because, again, what will you do? One little lie to recoup all that you've been wrongfully denied? That's real. Or maybe you're a student. And maybe you're a really good student, and you had to miss a class for a soccer game, and your friend gives you the homework that you missed in class while at soccer. And like a good student, you stay up late doing your homework, and you do the problems, but guess what? It's the wrong problems. And the next morning, you realize it's the wrong problems. Your friend realizes that he gave you the wrong problems, and even their friend feels terrible for it. And you're a good student. And like, hey, I'm sorry. Why don't you just copy my homework in between classes? It's my fault anyway. In that moment, your situation becomes David's situation. You can take something that you feel like you deserve, that you were wrong, that you were given the wrong homework, and you did the right thing by doing it. But now you have a choice. Will you take what is rightfully yours, or what you feel like is rightfully yours in a sinful way? And those situations are everywhere, aren't they? What will you do when you take something that you want, maybe even need, maybe that you feel like you deserve, but you have to take it with a sinful step? And that message comes through loud and clear, which is, again, the title of the message, the big idea for today, is don't sin to win. Is it winning to get what you want? Yeah, kind of, because we're all working on things that are good. It's good to win. David could have won by taking the kingship, but you had to take it through a sinful way. Again, you can win at work, but you can win the wrong way. You can win at school, but you can do it the wrong way. You can win with relationships, but you can win it in the wrong way. And don't sin to win. Well, in the rest of chapter 24, in verses 8 through 21, David, he lets Saul get away from the cave, and David goes out then, holds out that tassel and calls him out and says, hey, I'm not the traitor that you think I am. I'm innocent. Look, I could have killed you. And Saul, he actually has a change of heart. Briefly, but he has a change of heart. And he knows that he has been bested. Again, there's this hard evidence that he just got beat on his own game. That he was the hunter, but he became the prey, and then he let David go in peace at that moment. In fact, he actually blesses him. He has a change of heart, again, just for a moment, though. By the beginning of chapter 25, we move on that chapter, Samuel dies. And this is a terrible moment in their history, Israel's history, because Samuel was a national leader. And everybody gathers for the funeral. Even David gathers for the funeral, even though he's hunted and on the run. But after the funeral, David, he ends up in the town of Maon. And since he is on the run, he needs some supplies. And there was this man named Nabal who was there, and he was hosting this gigantic feast. And this guy was a rich, rich man. And so David, he sent a messenger to ask for some food and supplies. David, he actually had previously cared for Nabal's shepherds and was hoping that Nabal would return the favor. And what was Nabal's response? Who's this dude? Who's David? I don't even know who this guy is. I'm not going to give him anything. And you know what? His response ticks David off. Like, everyone in Israel knows who David is, right? He's a national hero. Like, it's like a slap in the face to David. And so David, in his rage, he actually decides he wants to kill Nabal and everyone that's at his party. That's what he decides. But thankfully, he stopped. Nabal's wife, Abigail, who's not a jerk, sexually steps in. She brings out supplies to David and his men as they were heading out to take out this party. And she goes and apologizes for her husband and also calls out David for his potentially sinful response. And David, he hears her out and realizes that he was in the wrong, and he repents. Again, David, he again had a chance to get what he deserved. After caring for Nabal's shepherds in the past, it would have been the right thing for Nabal to give him food for David and his men. Yet Nabal refused, and so David, he tried to take what he deserved in an evil and sinful way. David, again, was going to sin to win. He almost failed again at this opportunity. It wasn't until Abigail's kind yet challenging words until he realized that he was wrong. Again, this is another situation that can easily apply to us here in 2024. Now, how often do we encounter a situation that can cause us to go off the handle? Again, you may not go and wipe out an entire party, but you may be tempted to send that angry email or that text message. You might be tempted to scream or yell at your kid or your grandkids. You may be wronged at someone at work. You may be tempted to respond with that wrong with another wrong. And you know what? We all need an Abigail in our lives that can come alongside us and kindly and lovingly shut us down. We need someone who's willing to say the hard words to remind us what a godly response is, even when we don't get what we deserve or think we deserve. So my question for you today, right now, is, do you have an Abigail? Do you have an Abigail? If so, who is that? If you do, I encourage you to reach out to that person this week and thank them for being that Abigail to you. Now, here in chapter 26, our third story today, again, another situation pops up for David. Same situation of David wanting to take something with a sinful act. In chapter 26, the Ziphites sell Saul some information. They rat David out again. They rat him out because they're afraid of Saul, that Saul is going to do to them. They're more afraid of Saul than they are following the rightful king. And so they sell him out, and in verses 1 through 2 of chapter 26, it says, the Ziphites went to Saul at Gibeah and said, is not David hiding on the hill of Hakilah, which faces Jeshimon? So Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with his 3,000 select Israelite troops to search there for David. Again, it's the same scenario right here, isn't it? David's going to actually get another chance to get what's rightfully his. It's going to be an opportunity that's going to require, again, another sinful step. In verses 3 through 9 of this chapter, David and his nephew, Abishai, they sneak through a sleeping camp all the way to Saul. In fact, they actually get there, and Abishai basically goes to David and said, this has to be God right here. There's no way we could have gotten here if it wasn't for God. Let me kill him for you. So what does David decide? He says no to that request. I mean, listen to what he says here in verses 10 through 11. He says, as surely as the Lord lives, he said the Lord himself will strike him, or his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and water jug that are near his head, and let's go. So again, David, He learns from his previous encounters, and he doesn't let a small sin even substitute for a big one. He takes the water jug, he takes the spear, but again, has nothing to do with embarrassing Saul. It was just sending him a message to remind him, hey, I could have killed you. I could have killed you. David was not causing Saul to break God's law. It was just a message. So then David, afterwards, he gets up to the hill, and he calls out Saul just like before, and just like last time, Saul has a change of heart. In fact, so much of a change of heart that Saul actually invites David to come back to his home with him. But of course, David's like, nah, I'm not doing that. Nope, that's it. Not going to happen. And, David actually leaves. And this right here is actually the last encounter between Saul and David. Actually, in the last few chapters of 1 Samuel, which we're not actually going to be covering in this series, because we'll be beginning a brand new series here in 2 weeks called Big Questions, Big God, just kind of go over the big questions that a lot of believers and non-believers have about our faith. So we're going to go over that starting September 29th. But anyways, the last couple chapters of 1 Samuel, Saul's going to die in battle, just kind of like what David said. And this right here is our last encounter. And David realized that he shouldn't win with sin, and that he realizes that God will provide for him. So anyways, I love just how all these three stories give a vivid picture of somebody standing over an opportunity. That's, again, just standing over something good. Again, the kingship was good. Having your needs met was good. Getting what was promised to you is good. In all three stories, the message comes in loud and clear: you don't sin to win. In all three stories, it seems like the sinful act, the easy way out, it seems like the right way to go. But when the story plays out, we see that God actually provides in miraculous ways. In chapter 24, God provided a bathroom break. God can work through bathroom breaks, actually. David got to clear his name through the provision of a bathroom break. In chapter 25, God provided Abigail to provide perspective to David. God brought someone to help provide what David and his men needed, food and supplies, and also call David out on his potential sin. And in chapter 26, again, I didn't read this verse, but I want to close with this verse because it shows that when you choose to win God's way, that God will provide in miraculous ways. It says in verse 12, it says that David took the spear and water jug near Saul's head, and he left. No one saw or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping because the Lord had put them into a deep sleep. And David, he chose to win God's way. He got to clear his name before Saul, and Saul left and went on his way. But, God provided relief. What did he use? He used sleep. He put everyone in that 3,000-person army to sleep. David got to walk right up to Saul, take the spear and jug, and clear his name. And our application for today is that God will provide in ways that we can't even imagine when we fully trust him. And God will provide in ways that we can't even just imagine with our tiny little brains, that when we fully trust him. But in order to get to that place where you see God provide in those ways, you have to commit long in advance not to sin to win. Because the time to decide I'm going to do the right thing is not when you're standing over what you want in that moment, right? When you're standing over the top of what you want and you could grab it with a sinful act and you haven't rehearsed over and over again that you're going to win God's way, you're in trouble, right? Because choosing in that moment when you haven't prepared ahead of time to do what's right is really hard. It's really hard. But if you rehearse ahead of time again and again and again, days and weeks and months and years ahead of time of saying, I will win God's way, that I will trust him for my provision, again, you will see God provide in miraculous ways. But before you get there, you have to say no to a sinful act for provision. By our timetables, God is rarely early, is he? But he's never, ever late. And if you think God is late, the likelihood that you grab what you want with a sinful hand, it goes way up. But if you know that God is never, ever late and he'll provide miraculously when you trust him, you can wait another minute. You can wait another hour. You can wait another month. You can wait another year, and you can trust God to provide. Again, the message comes in loud and clear. Don't sin to win. Would you join me in prayer? And God, we love you so much, and we just trust you. We trust you even when it hurts. Like when it's so tough to not take what we want, what we need, maybe even when we think was promised, we know it's been promised to us, to not take it with a sinful step. This morning we exercise trust today. And God, we pray that you would steady our hand from taking what is good with sinful grabs. To help us to trust you to provide. God, we just pray for a miraculous intervention. We believe it will come because we know who you are and we know that you provide. And God, I pray for my brothers and sisters here that they would be strengthened in their faith to do just that. We love you so much. We pray this all in your precious name. Amen.